All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Project Kids. We are at episode 15 of Project Kids. And Michael Wan is with me. And we ended up having kind of an entertaining conversation before we got started this morning. And so in hindsight, we wish we would have recorded it, but who knew? Anyway, Michael, how are you, bud?
I am doing great. And if we could live our life through hindsight, imagine what would happen. Imagine all of the choices you would have made differently. But maybe hindsight's overstated because I kind of like the unknown. I bet you that was just a warm up for what we're going to touch today.
So I do actually think on a certain, I think there's a possibility that we are living our life reversed from what we think it is, but we don't recognize it. So we don't employ the wisdom of hindsight. I think a lot of the things that we think of as dreams, like memories, like familiarities are actually because time works in a very different way than what we have thought. So a lot of things that we think were just ideas or things in our head actually were experiences we had in what felt like the past, but was really a travel to the future, but it happened already a long time ago, but we didn't know. Right. It's not hindsight, it's that kind of thing. So, but I do think that if we were aware of what was happening and employing hindsight, it would probably screw it the way life unfolds, because we'd spend all of our time trying to orchestrate things in a particular manner, worse than people do now, right? And so everything would become completely non-spontaneous, and I think that would be boring.
I mean, well, so there's a couple questions or a couple thoughts I have with that. I've heard that a lot, in terms of thinking well, if it wasn't for this, life would be boring. And I don't know if boring, I agree with you as it relates to time and how we experience life is probably very different than what it seems like from our perspective. But I don't think boring is the reason why it's designed that way. We could use that to describe it. But I am curious. I don't have an answer to this. It's I wonder what is the reason? It can't just be for novelty. It can't be for to avoid boringness. But there's something there. I agree with that. And along those lines, so I'm talking to a friend of mine last week, a good friend of mine, and I like this guy I like how this guy sees how he sees reality. And he's got this very, very interesting lens where he is immensely rational. When I say rational, I mean linear thinking. Was a math major, really good with numbers and equations and things make sense and orderly, and is great whenever you need something broken down to that very quantifiable analysis. He's really good with that. Good card player, poker player, knows all the statistics and probabilities and blah blah blah. But what I think is so friggin' fascinating how he sees reality, because I think that in itself to me is I'll go use the word boring. That to me is boring. But what's so interesting about him is he also has this other side, and it's not so much out of he's come to this viewpoint or this additional lens which he experiences and understands reality from. That I desire this to be true. He's that way because it's happened so friggin' much in his life that his rational, logical, mind is okay, well, the only conclusion I can make is the fact that this is how things is. And so this conversation, I've never heard him describe it this way before, but he says that he is able to peek beyond the event horizon. And so I want to say this, this is not the type of language that this type of person or this type of thought you would expect to say. I'm well, what do you mean? And he's I just consistently throughout my life, I always know a second or two before something's going to happen. I just know it. And it could be anything from something's going to fall, someone's going to say something, something's going to happen. And he really developed this, I think, playing poker. because he was able, like, he would do all of his like, his like decision making statistical analysis on a particular hand, but then like there was this other thing, he's like, no, this is right, and it turned out, or he had a feeling that this is what I should do, and it turned out over and over again that his feeling was more accurate or a better predictor than like just normal analysis. And so like listening to him talk about like seeing beyond the event horizon, like on this consistent level. And he's like, I don't know, I don't really do anything with it. It just makes me happy to be able to like experience life like that. But the point of all of this, the reason why I'm telling this story right now is like what you were saying in terms of like this reversal. You talk about the reversal with time. I'm like, well, like, how does that work with like seeing the event horizon from the past? If what he's saying is an accurate description of capabilities, like, what about like other potentials or probabilities or things in the past? Like, is that hindsight? I don't know.
Okay, so a couple of things. So what you were talking about it's interesting you bring this up. What you're talking about being able to peak that with the event horizon, and he sees things just a few minutes or a few seconds before they happen or whatever. I actually think that okay. So his obsession with knowing all the details of all that kind of stuff are actually what make him able to peep it. In fact, they may have actually caused his obsession with the details. Right. So he may have had that happen a couple of times when he was little, but didn't have the rational and analytical mind to know what was happening. But every time he peeped it, he noticed there were certain conditions. So those conditions became fixed in his mind. So that's part of his attraction to analysis, is he's always looking for certain things to be important to a certain condition. Jeff and Gaetan and I got into this the other day in the chat room, right, in the group. And we were talking about this because throughout certain like major events in history, there seems to be certain sets of conditions that are present every time a particular thing happens, right? And
can you give me an example of what you're referring to?
Well, okay, so one of the things we were trying to figure out what they were, like we're trying to see what the characteristics are that all have to be there. Like, is it something to do with like numbers, colors, smell, like what else is going on, right? Like we're trying to figure out what the characteristics or what the set is, right? But it seems to be that. So one of the things that I brought up in the conversation, like Gaetan is really working on sussing out what things need to be the combination of things present for something to seem to occur, right? And it's more about that than people conspiring to make something happen. More like people know anytime certain conditions are present, something can or will happen, and then they appear to be the authors or the conspirators of it, when really it was coming anyway and they just figured out how to ride it. Like if you go back, she was telling me about reading that throughout history, there was this kind of thing. So one of the things that I brought up is several years back, you know who Melissa Melton and Aaron Dykes are? Their channel is Truth Stream Media. They don't
certainly.
Right. Okay. So they're great, right? One of the things that Melissa noticed many years ago was that every time there was an illegal action taken in Syria, either by like the United States or the allies of the United States and NATO or whatever, every single time something like that happened, there would be a school shooting. So the American public would not be informed that we've taken an illegal action in Syria because everybody was busy watching the crazy shit about the school shootings, right? Kind of stuff. One of these things. Every single time she created a chart, she had this long chart of this kind of thing, right? And so if you are the American mind, or like if you are the mind of the world, right, and you think that America is doing empire stuff, it's like, okay, they're creating this to distract the Americans from knowing what's going on in the rest of the world. If you're American focused, you're thinking, oh, okay, they're bombing the rest of the world, so we don't, pay attention to this or whatever. When what it really is there's a set of conditions that occurs on the day that those things happen that actually bring those things into fruition, right? Like kind of thing. And my thought was like, and I had said this in the group, do you know who Marilu Henner is?
The one with the photographic memory?
Yes, right.
Who had a strange interaction with Andy Kaufman? Yeah, I know Marilu Henner.
Okay, so yes, Andy Kaufman, there you go. So she has this perfect memory, but like, it's not like you can say any day to her. You can be like Tuesday, January 37th, 1905 million or whatever. And she doesn't just say, oh yeah, that was the day this happened. She'll give you like the full list of things that happened, right? Like she doesn't just say one thing. She might focus on like the more main thing that people know about, but she'll also say like a couple of other things, and some of them might even be personal, right? Things that happened for her that day or whatever. My guess would be that she might be able to help come up with the list. It's not in her mind to do that now, but because her memory is so good, it may become easy if you were to look at her journal or she doesn't keep a journal or a diary, but let's just say she were to make one for all the days that she's been alive, right? I bet you those threads would be there because she notices particular things. And what's interesting, Marilu Henner was on a television show that my cousin used to write for. And like, they didn't like her. Like, right? Like they're very
like the writers did not like Marilu Henner, or
like she was like the odd one out between all the actors and the writers and the producers and stuff like that. Like she was the one they made fun of because she was like maybe a Republican when everybody else was a Democrat, or maybe just not super left, if not a Republican. And then I think at a certain point they found her brain annoying, right? But I think most, I like, to me, it's fascinating. I'm like, I'd be playing with that all the time with her, whatever. But it's interesting, there could also be a very deep-seated place in the heart of some of these people that they don't want people to remember every detail about them because there's some not nice shit to look at, right? So I think that exists as well. But I've always found.
What do you mean that exists? Like a desire to not have everything remembered?
People, like I've been told it's annoying to people how good my memory is. They're afraid to do something embarrassing in front of me because they're afraid I'll never forget. And
who are these people who are afraid to do something embarrassing? I want to know what they are hiding.
Right. Well, that's the thing right now. I think in this case, it's just like silly stuff. But in the case of Hollywood, the stuff ain't so silly because some of the stuff is pretty gross. Right. So, or at least very compromising of like an idea people might have of who somebody is. Right. So, anyway, but yes, that goes to what you're saying. So I think more likely what happened, what his situation was in life is he started having these precognitive experiences as a kid, didn't completely understand them, but at some point you start to notice that, oh, every time this happens, this is here, right? And so his really young mind got really good at picking out which the analysis points are, right? And so that's why he's so good at all the things that he does. And the relationship between that sort of intuitive feeling and the things that are actually the points of analysis is very strong in him. And that allows him to have the freedom to act that to intuition, right?
Yeah.
Because the points that are important to note, it's built into him. He doesn't have to think about it. His sense is just going to pick that up, and so he can follow his intuition. But I wanted to show you. I have a visual description of what I think time actually looks like, and this is from Jeff Mills's website. This is his time tunnel T-shirt. So I think what we're talking about, I think I'm starting to understand that there's relationships between points in time, two of them. We can call them axis points. And then there's all of this movement. And then here it would go back underneath, right? All of this movement around them that is what we call like the sort of what goes around comes around, or sort of how everything starts at one point and eventually returns back to it, but it seems like a wild ride. And I think this is where some of our confusion about time comes in, right? Because we expect it to be just linear and in one direction, right? But I think it really, and if you look at something like this, this is like a lot of how like a Tesla towers work, right? You can go up here in Texas and you can see a field that has two Tesla towers and they're like this, but there's all this activity and motion around them, right? But this is also largely a lot of the symbolism that's been used in mind control, right? If you look at like the kind of laws of mental domination and different kinds of things, like this is a lot of that symbolism, but what you generally don't see is this sort of motion here. You just see the circular thing with the hole in the middle, right? So I think some of the things that we're dealing with now, and like my explanation to you last week in the glass bead game about how, like, how my experience here now, and then the memories I have from 1999, like, it's crazy to me that like all of these memories I've been trying to really sort out for like a number of years, there's like symbols that are attached to them all in a very small area of town, right? And some of them look like they're new. They weren't there. Right? I know some of them were not there when I was here in 1999, but they all encapsulate the experiences and the memories which I have, which has led me to wonder if somehow way back here, for one night, I got a trip into the future, and my whole life since then has been this like round away, like trip back to this time right now, right? Like somehow I got a glimpse of this, right? This time in the future. And then there's just been all of this sort of wandering around until I got finally to the spot in time that I had peeped earlier, right? Kind of thing to make it.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just starting to play with some of these ideas, but I actually think that this is either, I don't know if this is the way time naturally is, or if this is the function of like our ever increasing and compressing technology that is making time do this. So I don't know which it is, or if it's something else entirely different or some combination thereof. But I think that when you have this peep of the future, if you're able to take the 360, like the 360 panoramic view, and then bring that back to you when it actually approaches in your real, like your life that you're aware that you're living, you'll be able to recognize all those pieces the way I just did.
Right, right.
And so then, I guess my point is like, now I'm aware of that. So now going forward, when I have some strange experiences, right, instead of just thinking like, okay, like I lost time and something happened to me during that time. Now it's like, wait a second, what I thought was lost time, was it really somehow an advance forward in time to get a view of things, right? And then, so now maybe there'll be more analysis when I have a weird experience, instead of just being like trying to figure it out. Forget trying to figure out what happened or why it happened. What did I see when I was there? So if I begin to approach it again, I know what it is.
Right? So along those lines, you sent me some texts. Was it yesterday? I don't know, but how you're playing with the word time as a word and the other words that are in it.
Yeah.
And so along those lines, like, I like to think about like, part of what I think you're hinting at, particularly as it relates to our inability to see time as it is, as opposed to like what we think it is. Not to say that I know what it is, but I think part of it has to do with like, it's very fundamental. So it includes in that, like, on a certain level, like the different words that are included in the word time, because a lot of it is this like word mind magic sort of stuff.
Exactly.
But then the other aspect is like, well, what is the actual definition of time?
Right.
And so going back to that image which you had, like that image is a schematic. And I think that that's important to say. Like a schematic is a two-dimensional representation of something of a greater dimension. So what we're seeing right here is a two-dimensional representation of something else. And those dots in the middle, what they are two events. Yes. And what time is, like the actual, when we're using the word time, what we're talking about is the lag between two events.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
That's what it is. And then, and what you're saying is like, how do we get there? And so I think like part of the deconstruction of the hiding in plain sight of what time is, and how we would, by having a greater understanding of what we're thinking of the relationship between events and the lag between them, it comes from all of this, like, this is the definition and it happens linear and all of this sort of stuff. So the deconstructing of like, what is the word time? Like, what are the other words with time? And then like thinking about like, it's not so much linear, but it's like, what are the different events which we're comparing? I think that's a big thing, is like, what are the events, the lags which we're looking at? And, I sense there's something there. I want to go and sit with and maybe draw that diagram. I think that's a phenomenal schematic. Yeah. And it probably points to something very, very practical and usable. Like as I'm saying this, what's almost coming into my mind is like, we're given this other schematic of like what a wormhole is or what a black hole is in space. And it shows us with 3 dimensions, and it's almost like it's kind of like a torus shape. We see it like going in that kind of looks like to me, if you were to take that donut, take that torus, and you flatten it. Well, no, you flatten it out. You cut it and you flatten it out. Like that's what that is. And so like I want to go a little bit deeper with it. I want to draw it. Drawing, I think, is a really neat way to begin to understand things on another level. Because we talked about my trip out to Austin this summer, and I was like, do I friggin' fly out there? Do I drive out there? But the truth is, I want to go through the fucking tourists out there, and I don't want to do any of that shit.
Right.
That's my mission.
All right. Well, because there's going to be so many things here which you find interesting. You're going to have to come frequently, so we're going to have to figure out the tunnel between.
You have to figure that out. I'm craving food out there. Like okay. I'm not even eating now. I'm going to fast until that trip.
Oh, you might not. You're pretty skinny already, my friend. I don't know.
I'm going to do Buddha shit.
All right, some Buddha shit. Okay, so to what you were saying, and I made a little recording about it, like where I just kind of went through some of the definitions and the details yesterday in the cafe clip. Like we did that. I looked up the definition of time, right? And I looked up the definition of emit, item, and might, right? And then if you further break those words down, you have it and me. And it's interesting if you think of time as being it and that you being the person experiencing it as me. So it and me. But what was interesting is how many definitions of those 4 words exist that are nothing we've ever been told about. Like,
all right, let's go down that list. I want to be educated.
Okay, well, let's do this. This might be easier than trying to open everything. Like, again, I think did I take some pictures of it? I was doing this on my phone the other day while I was looking at it. Let me see if I have. No, I took them all down from there. All right. So let's do this. I don't want to spend the whole time on this because I have created a clip. There's a cafe clip about it. I'll send it to you, right? Because it's kind of boring to go through it all. But here's the part that's interesting.
Tell me the part that's interesting. Cut to the chase.
The amount of references to atoms, molecules, radiation, and currency that exist within the definitions for those 4 words, right, are fascinating. Okay. And those aren't the things that you would necessarily, other than emit, you'd think of like, okay, something's emitting gas or leaking or whatever, right? But the others were kind of surprising, right? But what was super interesting was on the definition of might, because that was the one I had the least ideas about other than just like the tick, because the other
MITE.
Yeah, the other ways of saying might are spelled differently, like MIGHT, right? So I was trying to think like, are there many other meanings of might? But when I was looking up that definition, and we did all of our looking on dictionary.com to keep it consistent between the words, right? At the bottom, they have lists of papers where the word was used, right? Now, this is going to fucking blow your mind. Okay.
Blow it.
All right. So on last Monday at the group, we did something I had been wanting to do for a long time, in that we talked about the relationship between psychedelics and particle accelerators, right? Because at some point I had looked up those 2 words in combination and found that there were, for some reason, hundreds of scholarly articles written that contained information about both of those things in the paper, which I thought it was unusual to me how many scholarly papers had been written about it. So Eric, one of the guys in the group, and myself decided we each go read 1 or 2 papers and we'd come back and talk about it on Friday, right? Eric ended up not being able to come. I only read 1 paper, but I happened to go through, and I think on page 3 or 4 of the list, the one that jumped out on me was a paper called The Man Who Saved Geometry. So that's the one I picked. I picked it without knowing anything about the content of it, right? And I ended up reading this paper about the gentleman named Donald Coxetter, who I'd never heard of before. And it was fucking fascinating. And it talked about some of these ideas, which you and I just went through in relation to that drawing that we looked at, right? And what's weird about this was there was no mention of psychedelics or particle accelerators in the list at all. But the paper was fascinating to all of the things which you and I talk about. So I felt like I had kind of been led there, but I didn't really know why, right? So when I'm looking at this on a different device, when I'm looking at this stuff about might, of the whole internet, of all the use of the terms might, the paper that comes up which is not about mites, the paper that comes up that uses the word might as an example sentence that they're using on dictionary.com was an article written by the same person who wrote the article about Donald Coxetter. Her name is Siobhan Roberts. So we started digging into her a little bit, and she's kind of an interesting character. Almost
Is
like
she still alive?
Yeah, she's still alive. She's a journalist about mathematics, right? But she also creates some very weird like art that is used in gaming and looks like maybe in NFTs, right? So I'm like, okay, we're being led towards something, whether it's the natural kind of leading or the false kind of leading. It's fucking fascinating, right? But of all and the paper wasn't about mites. The paper that showed me about was not really about particle accelerators and psychedelics. How is it? And this article she had written about mites, she just wrote last week. Right, almost like it was there, like we were coming upon it, and so the paper needed to exist in order for us to find it, kind of thing.
Right. And
but a lot of her artwork looks like that which we just looked at that's on the Jeff Mills shirt. That's not her artwork, but all of this black and white, sort of hypnotic, psychedelic looking drawings and stuff like that. In fact, one of them is a circus tent. It's a circus tent with that sort of black and white whirling kind of stuff on there, almost as if, welcome to the circus, kids, you finally arrived.
So what was her article about mites about?
So let me see if I can.
And tell, what exactly is a mite? Do mites live in my skin? I think they do, don't they?
Okay, so this is the sentence. Okay, so the paper she wrote is called Jeffrey Hinton Has a Hunch About What's Next for AI. Okay, and the sentence which this dictionary.com extracted from her paper to show me is the top example of the use of the word might on the internet is, and you'll love this, right? The neural net learned to iteratively improve at classifying and identifying various objects. For example, a mite, a mushroom, right? How many times have we talked about mushrooms here? Motor scooter, which those things are super popular around here. A Madagascar cat. That's the sentence that it extracted of all the sentences about mites on the internet to show me. And her paper was about AI. So we're on to something about understanding how this AI works and which are we dealing. I was listening to some video that somebody sent us yesterday where she was trying to separate the difference between like natural and organic AI and this bullshit version that we're dealing with right now kind of thing, right? But I just, to me, that was beyond, and she wrote the paper April 16th in the MIT Technology Review. Which is also a way of saying might, MIT. That came up when I was doing my wordplay. Also, I was like, oh, it's funny. MIT is in there and it's Tim backwards. And we know a guy who's in the conspiracy cocktail group, Tim, who's like this kind of genius talking about the things that we're talking about and whatever. So all sorts of things were coming up for me. But the odds that the two papers I would read, either be directed to about totally different topics. And that list of particle accelerator psychedelics articles, I pulled that list up like back when we were in Los Angeles 6 months ago or whatever. And it had just been sitting there on my computer, right? So there was some awareness of two events in time that like literally one dot would be the might art, the searching for the might art thing. One dot would be the particle accelerators and psychedelics. And then all that curvature is the arranging of things in space and time that would have to happen for both of those articles to be by Siobhan Roberts.
How do I spell Siobhan?
Siobhan is S-I-O.
S-I-O?
S-I-O. Hold on. Let me make sure I give you the exact right spelling of her name so I don't, let me pull this back up. S-I-O-B-H-A-N. B-H-A-N. S-I-O-B. And how do you pronounce that? Siobhan.
How did you know that? How did you look at those letters and come to that enunciation? Because I think in a million years, but I'm not good with that. I'm not good with that. I'll say that, but I want to know someone who is good. Like, what are their secrets? Because I don't have that secret. I don't know. So
I've known two people in my life named Siobhan spelled the same way, right? And one was a little girl and one was an older woman. The part that's interesting is they look almost exactly alike. They're not the same person, right? But I coached a little girl in gymnastics. back in like the 90s whose name was Siobhan. And then I met an adult later. The adult that I met later was older than me, so couldn't have been the same Siobhan because I was teaching a little kid.
Right. And we don't like subscribe to anything like time travel or anything like
yeah,
that. So there's no way they could have been the same person because we write that off.
No way with the set of rules we've been handed, right?
Exactly. Have you seen them together in the same room?
No, right? So we probably are dealing with a Michael Latoya situation here, right? Like, but anyway, they had the same characteristics, right? Like the same skin tone, the same kind of hair, the same sort of really skinny, like bony legs and like all that kind of stuff, right? And the same like energy about them, like overly anxious and that kind of thing. She looks very different than either of them. Anyway, so
is that an Irish name?
Yes, that's one of the, that's one, I think it comes up in some other cultures as well.
Yeah, it looks like, so along those lines, because as you were talking, this is what was going on in my mind about two people who resonate because to what degree, I don't know, but I think like unusual names and archetypes are, you know, what the correlation is, I don't know. But when you were talking about Marilu Henner, all I'm thinking about is MaryLou Retton. Right. And then like, you know, we had our conversation about gymnasts before, and like Marilu is spelled different for each of them. And they both are like, you know, they represent some, a degree of excellence in a different way. And I looked at their pictures and they both have the same, like really flashy smile. MaryLou Retton is a little bit more like, you know, pizzazz, but like they both have that. And there's something interesting there. And their last names, they both have a double consonant, you know, Henner and Retton. Yeah. So I don't know. So the fact that you talked about.
I'll go one further, but first, before we go into the Marilu Henner thing, this begs the question, who is Siobhan Roberts? It is making me think of like, remember, did you ever see, I think it was Atlas Shrugged, who is John Galt? Right. That's the question that was popping up all over town. There would be like little stickers and papers and things written. Who is, who the fuck is Siobhan Roberts, dude?
I don't think it's a real person. I don't think that when you told me that story, like, this is what I thought. I'm like, that's like the level of AI. Like, I don't like when they brought up natural or artificial AI. I don't, you know, to me, it's all the same if it goes through the computer, maybe. But regardless, I think that story was created. I think that story in somehow real time popped up for whatever reason. That's what happened. I've had the exact same experience, like in a lot of my research lately, like the thing which I'm searching for, like, I'm like, wow, this is the perfect article. It hits all of my hot buttons. I'm like, oh, it was released like a week and a half ago.
Yeah, right. We get that a lot. We've been getting that completely a lot, but the bigger question, let's not get distracted with thinking that the world revolves around us, even though it does. Let's not get distracted, right?
That's the me and the it.
We have, yes, the anchors, right? So I looked for particle accelerators and psychedelics a certain amount of time ago, event number 1, right? Eventually I would go searching for the definition of the word might, right? So these are the 2 anchor points. And then that the tunnel is all of that movement that exists between them. So once I don't know if it was like a game of probabilities, and there's been multiple papers produced by some sort of AI system because they thought, okay, there's 10 possibilities of something she'll go looking for in 6 months, and let's have a reality created around each one of them. And each of those could be like you see on that picture of the shirt, right? There's like probably 10 or 12 white lanes, 10 or 12 black lanes, right? Like each one of those could be a path that I would travel, and they all go through generally the same area, but it's like being a different lane on the freeway. You see things a little differently dependent on which lane that you're in. And so each one,
and your travel is going to be different, like the speed, like all of those different sort of like literal elements of if that was the lane you were in, like, you know, you would be covering more distance in the same amount of time, and like, you know, more assuming, like looking at it like 3-dimensional travel, like, you know, more G forces and stuff like that as you make those bends. Like, I'm being metaphorical when I say that, but yeah, like all of those talking about the different paths of experience.
Yes. Right. Okay. So then back to Marilu Henner and MaryLou Retton, I'll go one farther for you because I'm familiar with both of them. They are both not strongly disliked by people in their own industry because they are seen as politically incorrect for the direction that the things are going in those industries. Right. So I already explained to you the problem with MaryLou Henner, right, for the people in Hollywood.
Right.
The problem with MaryLou Retton for some people is that she did not jump on board when she did not go with the flock when all the information came out about the sexual abuse and the Carollis and stuff like that, right? Like she has been very strong in her support of the Carollis, but also in that gymnastics, that like gymnastics is, a wonderful thing. And to the extent that sexual abuse and stuff like that exists, it's very, very rare and it's being overblown, right? And so there's two things, like she had a very particular experience herself where I think she was very sheltered from a lot of the kinds of things. Like I do think that that was not her experience, right? I do think she had a unique experience in gymnastics. And I do think she's a little blind to some stuff. But I also think it's become very, very trendy to overlook the good things about gymnastics while everyone's dogpiling on some of these people and, using some examples to extrapolate a reality that, while more true than people believed before, is not the total truth about everything that gymnastics is. So even though I largely disagree with her, I do respect the fact that she didn't cave to the pressure of like going with the flow, because that's hard to do. You and I have both lost friends and opportunities in our life because we wouldn't cave to the pressure of what like the cool kids were doing, right? So I understand that. And she received a lot of hate. Now, she said some things, in my opinion, that weren't smart and whatnot, right? But she kind of staked out her position and was like, look, this is my feelings about gymnastics. This is my experience. I'm sticking with that, right? And that's hard to do. And Marilu Henner, basically the same thing, right? Marilu Henner, it's a very similar personality type. It'd be interesting to look at their astrology. I had no idea when we got started talking that we'd be talking about MaryLou Retton.
Do we ever have any idea? I don't think, well, because like on one level, like I've gotten to the point before when we first started doing these shows, like I would think a little bit more. I would plan a little bit more. And now I'm like, I know I learned through experience that whatever we plan, we never hit it. We just go like what the flow is. And I think for me, like that's become the fun of this experience of like, this like the 2 points, the it and the me, like, in one perspective, I'm it. And on the other perspective, I'm me, but watching this dance and seeing where it goes, but it always seems to like circle back to like the same sort of things.
Yeah.
So where do we want to go now? Where do we want to go now?
So let's go to, so for people who are playing the Glass Bead game with us, you've heard me talk a little bit about some things I noticed on my trip, but we only got to from Los Angeles to Austin. We only got to a couple of things, and we ended up expanding on a lot of stuff and having a whole show about some of that. But there were some other things that I noticed of like a different nature and a different quality that I thought I would share here. And I think we can start some of it in the first hour, and then we can move with some of it into the second hour. But what I wanted to talk about was a couple of things that I noticed on the way here. And I'm going to speak specifically about something I noticed in a place called Picacho Peak, Arizona. So you might want to bring this up on your map so you can.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this up. How would that word does not sound like something I could sound out knowing my inabilities. So how would I spell that?
I think because there's a couple of Picachos on the road. I think it's Picaca. CHU Peak.
CHU
Peak, and it's Arizona. Picacho Peak, Arizona.
How is that not Pikachu?
Pikachu. Maybe it's Pikachu. Like
Pikachu is like the first of the Pokemons, right?
Correct.
And Pokemon means demon pocket demon.
All right. So this all is going to inform where I'm going with this.
All right. So keep going.
All right. So Picacho Peak is at Picacho Peak. I've been familiar with it for many years because it's just a little outside of Tucson. And I used to live in Tucson. So when you're driving from Phoenix to Tucson, it's something that it's unmissable on the way into Tucson, right? It's sort of, I think it comes at, I think it's between Casa Grande and Tucson. It's very close to Casa Grande. Can't remember exactly which side of it is on. And of course, Casa Grande is where Evergreen is, and that's where the chemtrails began emanating for me in my life in about 1996 or 7. That's when I first noticed them, right? Okay, so Picacho Peak when you start to drive up to it, like it's an unusual peak right there off the freeway. And one of the things you notice is on the side of the hill as you're starting to approach it, there's like this cluster of houses and then nothing else. There's like a cluster, like there seems to be like somewhere between 10 and 40 houses. They're all like in the same area. They're like in front of one side of this peak, right? And I have stories in my head as to like, okay, those are the people that live there and work on whatever the underground base is and blah, blah, blah kind of thing. And then as you come around on the other side of it, right? Not the other side of the peak, the way the freeway passes by. So like when you see the houses, that would be the north side of the peak. But when you're coming around the east side on the freeway, there's a freeway exit there with almost nothing except for like some sex superstore. Like out in the middle of nowhere, this gigantic store that sells like porn movies and sex toys. Okay, it's huge, right? And so I'm like, all right, who the fuck is going? Now, sure, we all understand that like sometimes people want to like go away from their house to do their dirty deeds, but like what person is going to just stop off the side of the road and go to the sex shop at Picacho Peak or drive all the way out? It's far from Tucson. It's not like on the edge of town. It's like really far. Right. And in my head was just, this is a cover for something else, right? This is where people go, right? It's like a speakeasy or something like that, where like they go like, to find out where the entrance to the base is, or to find out where the portal to the other dimension that is accessible there. Now, this is an area of Arizona where the Toltec used to be, right? So I don't know if this is some intelligence agency, weapons company thing that has moved in on top of this, some interdimensional transportational system. The other thing that's there is some like really weird like farm where you can go have an experience with the animals or something. It was like,
is this part of like the sex shop, this animal experience thing, or are they not connected?
They appear to be not connected, right?
But I know how freaky people can be.
My guess would be, this would be my guess. My guess would be that there's multiple ways that this works, right? But my guess would be, it's kind of like when I used to go to a lot of like illegal raves back in the big rave days, you would have a map point. You might go and there'd be a guy sitting outside this coffee house, right? And you go up to him and you say the right word and he hands you a little piece of paper, and the little piece of paper has the address on it of the next place. So my guess would be the people go like to the sex shop, right? And the ones who are in the know somehow get directed to go to the farm kind of thing. And somewhere, when they're somewhere at the farm is either where they get the next piece of information or there's some kind of entrance to something or whatnot, right? But like, I'm like, this is fucking like, what the hell? This is like the biggest, it's huge. This place, when you're driving across country and you'll see the signs for like Stuckies or the Thing or whatever. And whenever you get there, it's like some stop where they sell like Native American art, like candied nuts and beef jerky. But there's some like weird series of like statues or something for children to look at that are creepy and freaky looking and stuff. But it's generally a pretty big place. This is that size, but it's like some super sex store kind of thing. And I'm like,
how many cars were in the parking lot?
A couple. Right. There was
just a couple, an absolutely enormous shop. And there's just a couple of cars there.
Just a couple of cars there. So my thought was like, okay, so this is basically like the only people that are going to go there are the fucking super freaks or the people who know to go there. Nobody's going to wander into that accidentally. And the super freaks that might go there are sort of the cover for the people who are going there for the covert reasons. Right. Kind of thing. Because if let's just say you or I, or a random person did accidentally wander in there, we're going to be much more taken with paying attention to the people who appear to be freaks, right? Than the ones that are just there to sort of scan the room, get the information on where their next place to go is. Right.
So is it called Lion's Den?
Yes, that's it.
There's no over.
Right.
For over 45 years, Lion's Den has been the official store of pleasure, passion, and romance. which can be expressed in a variety of ways. We aspire to provide pleasure products in a comfortable and upbeat atmosphere, along with education needed for our patrons to confidently and safely express whichever form of sexuality they choose.
You know what this sounds like? It sounds
What?
like the same description when you go to the website of people who throw underground parties when they describe what their events are about. And I know from my own experiences that sure, there's a party going on there, but there's also a lot of intel stuff going on there and a lot of freaky experiments and all sorts of weird, this is the same kind of thing.
And is the farm you're talking about Rooster Cogburn Ostrich Ranch?
Yeah, there was that, and then there was something else next to it that I couldn't tell if it was just like the same place, but a different portion of the farm that has something different going on, or a completely different thing.
Right. Well, it's funny you bring there. Like the sex super shops like that has been in my mind for years now. Like, what the fuck is that? Right. Going to Walmart
for sex toys. Like, what the fuck?
Like everything about like the ones which are, I mean, there are a lot of them which are along the lines of like heavy trucker routes. And so I'm assuming like, I'm like, okay, like I'm trying to break it down from every sort of perspective. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Like, I guess like if you're like all hopped up on speed and you're like driving 24 hours straight and you're like, speed gets you all worked up. And so like, I'm like, all right, I guess like maybe that makes sense. But I'm like, like something like doesn't really make sense to me. Like just with like the nature of how the internet works, like why are these stores like still, but anyway, so there was that. But then what really triggered it for me, like about 4 or 5 years ago, was when my parents moved to the Villages. And I talked to you about the Villages before, in Florida. When you drive into the Villages, there's one of these like huge sex superstores. And it's probably like, 2 miles outside of the Villages. It's not remote like what we're looking at in the Lion's Den, but I'm like, who's going there? Like, what's happening in like, I wanted to break down. I wanted to know, like, I wanted to hang out in the parking lot, but that totally sent the wrong signal. Like when I tried to do that. So I was like, I backtracked on that strategy.
Right.
but my point on all this is like, I think you're right. Like everything, like, it requires a different type of person. Like, particularly if I'm imagining that stretch of highway is like, that's the only thing that's out there, and like driving to the Lion's Den, which has been around for 45 years. So 45 years, what's my math? That brings me down to 1975.
Which is when I was born, which this is now becoming even more interesting. So I don't know how I didn't make this connection. All right, so now pull up on your map, pull that area up on your map and see where Casa Grande is.
All right, I'm looking right at it.
All right, so I think in the same area of that area, there's Casa Grande, there's Picacho Peak, and then there's also an area called Red Rock, I'm pretty sure.
All right. I don't see the Red Rock. But let me go and let me zoom in a little bit. Like in that general area where Casa Grande is.
In that, yeah, it might be a little bit different space-wise. Let's focus on Casa Grande and Picacho Peak for right now. How far is Casa Grande from Picacho Peak?
I'm sorry?
How far is Casa Grande from Picacho Peak?
All right, let me go and I was using the wrong software. I'm going to have to answer that question for you. So I'm going to go into here. Arizona. So I just switched out of map software. The one I was looking at was the map that was embedded in Lion's Den website.
Okay.
So now let me go. There's Pacha. There's Casa Grande. If I'm going to guess, I'm going to say 28 miles. I'll find out in a moment. That's my guess. Hold on. It is 19 and a half miles.
Okay. So Casa Grande is where like Evergreen is. the Evergreen facility, and that's the, you know, like the Evergreen that we just saw in the Suez Canal. And also where like Evergreen was the first like company really implicated in the spraying of chemtrails. I first noticed it when I was living in Tucson, right? The other thing, so that's what Casa Grande is mostly known for, is Evergreen being there, right? And you will also see a lot of the Evergreen planes at the Marana Air Force Base, which is partway between Casa Grande and Tucson, right? You'll see that. So that's where that like military corporation interaction happens around the chemtrails, right? But the other thing that Casa Grande is known for is for a particularly bad meth problem, right? And I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Salt and Sea, you understand the connection between intelligence agencies, police corruption, and methamphetamine. Okay. So it's interesting that those things are both there, right? Like in Casa Grande. Now, when I was living in Tucson, one of the things that was happening for me, and I've revisited Tucson a couple of times and tried to put some of it together, but haven't been there enough to really feel it out, was I would sometimes come to in my car in an area of town that I did not go to knowingly, finding myself driving back home late in the evening. Like I would just suddenly be like, okay, where am I? And it was an area, right, that is just downstream from where Picacho Peak and Casa Grande is, but in Tucson. But it's like on the other side of the freeway from where main part of Tucson is, right? And as I've done research over the years, there seems to be a lot of project program stuff going on in Tucson or in that area. But I'm curious about the connection between wherever I was finding myself. It was never not an area I was ever going during my waking awareness or because I had somebody I knew over there or something like that, right? It was a very industrial area of town, like the area where like you would imagine like the vegetables or foods from other parts of the country came in to be distributed to supermarkets, like kind of around, like would come in on a big truck, right? Or something. It was like that kind of area of town. So I don't know what it relates to this kind of stuff, but that was what I was having. I was not at that point. I think I had tried meth once in my life during the period of time that I was living in Tucson, but that was not a major part of my life living there. But I was having a lot of strange experiences. But whatever is going on there, like that space, that entire area between Phoenix and Tucson, but really between Casa Grande and Tucson is very unusual. There's a lot of very strange stuff going on there. And I definitely had missing time and time anomalies there. So I don't know what the nature, I don't know what that peak meant to the Toltec people or to the native people there. But there's something funny going on there. And the Lion's Den to me seems to be, I don't know, it stood out and just started all this information as I drove by and noticed it was just like almost downloaded at me, right? In terms of like, there's something else going on here. And this is all sort of a made up setting all around it that is, you know, basically designed to attract two kinds of people, the people who know they're going there to find something else, and then the freaks and perverts that will be the cover for that.
So what you didn't bring up about the area is its petroglyphs.
I would have imagined there would be some there, but I don't know anything about them.
So that's what that's what the Mount Pikachu seems to be best known for. Like just like looking at the you're doing like a cursory search while you're talking, and so there's a very high concentration of petroglyphs, and you don't find petroglyphs everywhere. Like, you know, petroglyphs are only found in certain places, and there are, you know, I look at petroglyphs. I live in an area which has very unusual petroglyphs, so I've studied them, and I've looked at other ones that are different. And so the petroglyphs, which if you go in and did you give me screen share capability?
Yeah.
Yeah. So where is that? Hold on for a sec. Where did I have that? So the petroglyphs that we see there, you know, there are a lot of, this is a common theme within petroglyphs. I've never seen like a map as to like where they're located, but you see this a lot in like Australia and places like that. And it's often used as these like circles and lines like electric universe.
Well, there's a circular particle accelerator right there, and I recognize this.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
like, you know, this has a lot of implications. It's like this, you know, the electric universe folks are like, hey,
Yeah.
this looks like, you know, what it looked like, or maybe particle accelerator. But when I saw this, particularly, you know, when you see like the linkage of the circles, I
Yeah.
can't help but think about the image which you showed me of
Time
time in the very beginning.
Correct.
And so we can see how there's apparently there's a lot, like, look right here. Here's this one's a little bit different. And here it makes
Nope. Yeah. Yep.
so now we're going to go and see this. You don't always see this in petroglyphs. The ones near where I live are a little bit different, but we don't have a lot of these. We definitely don't have the these circle ones which we're talking about. So when you're talking about hiding something, this obviously is pointing at the true nature. Let's see what this looks like.
Look at this one down here. Look at this one with this very all these circles inside of each other. Here.
Are you talking? I can't see what you're pointing at.
So it's literally looks like a tree trunk kind of thing almost. It's Brian, you just passed it. Go back up. Go back up.
That one?
No, go up. Scroll up. There. Your cursor was just over it.
This?
Nope, to the left of it.
This?
Yes.
That spiral?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're seeing that image right there. Prime photograph sites are just west of Tucson.
Okay, and just west of Tucson was the area that I was talking about.
Right. These are the how do I pronounce it? Because I'm going to keep calling it Pikachu, and I don't want to keep calling it Pikachu.
I think it's Picacho Peak.
Picacho. Yeah, that's what these are. Picacho, Arizona petroglyphs.
So, do you know where else you find these kinds of petroglyphs and a sex industry?
Where that?
Chatsworth, California.
Huh.
90% of all porns are shot in Chatsworth, California. Right, they're shot in the industrial area, but also like there used to be a house right around the corner from ours where like a bunch of porn stars lived and shot stuff, and they had this ice cream truck out front that said the ice cream bang bang truck, and when people would come over to my house, they'd be like, oh, I've seen a porn with that in it before, right, kind of thing, like, you know, or whatever, right? So Chatsworth is the home of like video porn, the video porn industry. Like, I don't know if it's maintained that position through like the evolution of the internet, but particularly in the 90s, like if you went to the gym in Chatsworth in the 90s, everyone there was a porn star, right?
Serious?
So I want to show you, now I'm going to see if I can pull it up because Jeff has updated my computer, so it might be harder to find things, but I'm going to see if I can find, it would be under downloads. Let's see if I can find Borough Flats. All right, I've got the Borough Flats document here. So this is, I'm going to screen share as soon as I find what I'm looking for. This is the Borough Flats document that I've referred to so many times in relation to my memories of Chatsworth and the FPV Angel stuff with the particle accelerators. These are the petroglyphs in Chatsworth. Look familiar?
Yeah. Borough Flats painted cave, the petroglyphs, 1200, 1800. Based on the pictographs, multiple the site plausibly is 3.
Look at this. There's
that. We've got that. Yeah, there's a common that. So I'm still more like, you know, you've piqued my interest with the correlation between like Chatsworth has like, you know, its connection with rocketry and aviation and that whole sort of aspect.
Correct.
And so then to also, and it has this petroglyph overlap, and now it has this sex industry overlap.
Correct.
And we're seeing the same thing here, correct? Not, you know, it's a sex shop, so it's not exactly the same as a sex industry, right. But still, like it's seemingly like you could put that anywhere. And if any, I mean, I would think it would be closer to a population center, but may like on the surface. But there's an interesting overlap, which I think when we look at it more so about the type of energies which are being tapped into as well. Whether that you want to say is like debasing sexual energy, or whether you want to look at it as like sexual energy as like that's a power within humans. Like, I don't know, or like, but there's definitely there's something there.
All right, I'm gonna go one more and then we'll take our break and move to the patrons hour. But the next, so the next spot that I wanted to talk, and there's another topic we'll revisit later about safety corridors in Arizona and New Mexico. I think mostly in New Mexico and what I think may be going on there, but we're gonna stick with what we're on to right here. So we were in Tucson and the very next day we drove to El Paso, Texas. Okay, we had lunch in El Paso. And then from El Paso, the next spot Jeff wanted to go to this place called West Texas. There's two Wests. This is the West that is in just east of El Paso. And it is where Jeff Bezos has building his 10,000-year clock and where he has his rocket launch site, his launch pad. Okay. All right. We're leaving El Paso. We're driving out of town on a road.
It's called West Texas.
You will not find it on a map. It's like a hidden corporate city. You can't. Jeff had to give me the coordinates in order for me to find it.
All right.
Okay. So we leave. We decide we're going to take not the main, not like the obvious interstate way to sort of head towards this place. We're going to take the high road, this is the way we just decided to do it for some reason. All right.
Okay.
We're leaving El Paso on a road, which I have never been on before, even though I've been to El Paso many times. Okay. So as we're getting to the outskirts of town, my attention is drawn to something that appears from what the structure is to be a drive-in movie theater, but from all the signage around it, it's a sex shop. They sell adult toys and pipes and things like that, right? But it's at like an outdoor drive-in movie theater place. All of the signs leading up to it, you're coming from the west and heading east, were about like drug paraphernalia and sex toys, right? And it's white and red. And then on the other side of it, once you've passed it, right? Like there's all these signs about masks, like COVID masks and things like that, go back to the same place, right? Like, oh, you just missed it, go back this way. So on one side, it's all advertising sex toys and drug paraphernalia. And then on the other side, there's signs about masks, but they're the same kind of sign. You can tell that the same person made the signs, right? Or the same company made the signs. And it's an old drive-through movie theater. Interestingly enough, and this was the week all this Evergreen shit was happening in the Suez Canal, right? Just past that, I see a cemetery called Evergreen Cemetery, right? So we have Evergreen near this sex shop, the same way we have Evergreen near that sex shop, but this is a different kind of Evergreen. It's a cemetery, right? So I see this place and I'm like, yeah, this is another one of those fucking speakeasies. This is like a speakeasy for people who are like looking for the interdimensional gateway or some shit like that, right? So people go like, like this is in a suburban area of El Paso, just like Chatsworth is a suburban area of Los Angeles where it's mostly families, right? Mostly families. And then there's some industrial stuff and whatnot, right? There's this big drive-in movie theater that used to be that. It's all bright red and white so you can see it. And this shit's going on there.
I'm confused. Where's this? Like, where do you buy stuff? Like, is it like, was there a concession stand of like the drive-in theater and like that's been converted?
You couldn't see from the street because you had to
you couldn't see. Gotcha.
Drive back a little ways, like sort of a dirt road, also like the dirt road to the Lion's Den kind of thing, right? So it was a little far back, not as far back from the highway as the Lion's Den was, but still far back, right?
Right.
Okay, so then a few miles after that, we're out of El Paso and on this unusual road that we're taking to go to West Texas, right? And I'm gonna stop right there because what we get into next is like a different set of information, right? But to me, this would be the likely place that you might stop to get your directions as you descend into the desert.
All right, yeah.
Okay?
And so that's one of the things like which also pops in my mind, like the sex shop, and particularly like a in your face sex shop is going to have a lot of barriers to entry for regular folk. Yeah. Like someone's like, whether like, I don't want to go there because it's filled with creepers, or like, I don't want to go there because I'm embarrassed to walk into a sex shop, or like what have you. There's a lot of things which are going to stop the typical person. And there's probably, so that's interesting. Like, who's traveling like on a family vacation.
And also when you are a kid and you grow up in an area that has one of these weird places, the idea in your mind from the time you're a kid is, oh, only the weirdos go there. right? Kind of thing. Like the freaks go there. Everybody who goes there is a weirdo. So you're not like interested in it. You don't want to go. You can't help but look at it kind of thing, but you're not going there. And if somebody weird goes in or emerges, you think they're weird because they're going to a sex shop. You don't think they're weird because they look a little out of place because they're not from here.
Right, right. Well, I think it's going to meet someone where they are. It's either going to like really intrigue them, particularly if they come from a very like repressed sexual family, and then to see something so in your face, or they're going to like meet it or like it creates some really interesting psychological binds or potentially within the children who grow up in that area and they see it all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
And particularly if it looks appealing, like a drive-in movie theater.
Well, and it's very colorful and bright. And like
right.
the other one in Tucson, it's the Lion's Den. Most kids have watched, Wizard of Oz, and they have or the Lion King or whatever, right? So they're going to look at it. It catches your eye and you're going to wonder, right, about it. But then there's this, once you sort of figure out what it is, right, then there's this other, it creates exactly the bind that you're talking about. You're both intrigued and sort of, ooh, I'm not supposed to do that, right? Kind of thing. So it is fascinating. All right. We're going to wrap up the public portion of this, and we're going to move over into the Patreon section. You can join us at patreon.com/offplanetmedia or at projectkids.locals.com for the second part of this show. Before we go, Michael, tell people where they can find you and what's on the offering board this week.
I mean, the t-shirts are only getting better. You should get yourself a t-shirt. You can do that at susquehannaalchemy.com. And then also support me at subscribestar.com/Susquehanna-alchemy. That for like more exclusive and personal content.
Awesome. That reminds me, when we're done today, we do either today or later this week, we do need to have a little talk about the designs, which we looked at before, because I have a question for you.
All right.
And then the other thing I was going to say to people is you can find me here. You guys found me, you can, but also my website is just about ready. It's going to be up within the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, if you are interested in nutrition consultation, life coaching, storytelling, hit me up, Emily C. Moyer at protonmail.com, and we will see you guys next time. See you on the other side.